January 1944. General George S. Patton sat in his temporary office in London, looking at the document before him. The document was top secret, and its contents both surprised and angered Patton. The order signed by Eisenhower was clear. Patton would be commander of First U.S. Army Group, but this wasn't a real army. This was a deception. Patton was 58 years old. He had won brilliant victories in North Africa and Sicily. He was the American Army's most aggressive, most talented tank commander. The Germans knew him very well. Even Hitler spoke of Patton. He would say, the most dangerous American general. And now this dangerous general will become the commander of an imaginary army. He would be the face of a fake invasion preparation that would appear to be heading to the Calais region. The real invasion would be to Normandy. And now in history's greatest military operation, he would be a puppet. That night Patton wrote in his diary, "They're using me like a moving toy. They're keeping me busy with a fake army in the most important operation. This is an insult. I was born to fight, not to deceive." But Patton also knew the truth. After the slapping incident in Sicily, his reputation had been tarnished. He had slapped an American soldier and another soldier, accusing them of being cowards. The incident had grown, leaked to the media, and the public was outraged. Eisenhower had protected Patton, but he had to pay a price. And this was the price. The actual command of D-Day would be given to Omar Bradley. Patton would wait. He would be part of a fake game. Then, after the Normandy beachhead was established, he would enter the real war. Patton understood this, but he didn't accept it. He was boiling inside. Before continuing the story, please hit the like button. It helps us reach more people with these forgotten stories. If you're new to our channel, subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, let's get back to the story. February 1944, the deception operation planned by British intelligence services began to take shape. It was named Operation Fortitude. The goal was simple, but the execution was complex. To convince the Germans that the Calais region was the real invasion point. Patton was at the center of this plan, because the Germans believed in Patton. In German intelligence files, Patton was marked as the most dangerous enemy. German generals respected Patton's tactical genius. Even Hitler was careful when speaking of Patton. The logic was this. If Patton was at the head of an army station in southeast England opposite Calais, then the real invasion would be made from there. The Allies certainly wouldn't assign their best general to a fake operation, right? But that's exactly what they were doing. As Patton learned the details of the operation, he felt both admiration and anger. The plan was truly perfect. A fake army would be created. Inflatable tanks, dummy aircraft, wooden buildings. Radio traffic would be created. Fake orders would be sent. German spies, most of whom were actually working as double agents, would receive false information, and Patton would be the face of all this. He would make official visits. He would organize meetings with fake units. He would show preparation movements opposite Calais. At a meeting, Patton asked British intelligence officers, "So am I an actor? A puppet playing on a stage?" The British officer gave a diplomatic answer. "General, you're playing the most important role. If this deception is successful, thousands of lives will be saved. Our soldiers in Normandy will face much less resistance." Patton grumbled internally. It made sense, but he was still angry. March 1944. A strange construction activity began in southeast England. A huge military build-up appearance was being created around Dover, Folkestone, Canterbury. But this build-up wasn't real. Patton regularly inspected this region. As he drove around, the scene he saw was both funny and impressive. Inflatable tanks were lined up. From a distance, they looked real. But up close, they were just air-filled rubber. Dummy aircraft had been placed at airfields. When German reconnaissance planes took photos, they saw a large air force. But in reality, there was just wood and cloth. An appearance of intense activity was being created at port facilities. Supply ships were coming and going. There was movement in warehouses, but most consisted of empty boxes and fake equipment. Patton once stood next to an inflatable tank. He hit it with his hand. It made a hollow sound. He turned to his staff officer. "This is the army I command." air-filled rubber and wooden pieces. But the most impressive part was the radio traffic. Every real army had a specific radio communication pattern. Orders from command center to units, reports from units, logistics coordination. Fusag's radio traffic was meticulously created. It carried all the communication characteristics of a real army. German listening stations were recording this traffic, analyzing it, and reaching a conclusion. A huge American army is gathering in southeast England. Its commander is Patton. The target is clear, Calais. Patton found this radio game particularly clever. At least there's a real brain in this part. He had written in his diary. April 1944. D-Day was approaching. Real preparations in Normandy were continuing at full speed. Bradley, Montgomery, other commanders were finalizing plans. Patton, meanwhile, was playing a fake game in southeast England. Patton's anger and disappointment were gradually increasing. What he wrote in his diary clearly reflected this period. April 23rd. Today I went to another fake inspection again. I examined wooden tanks. I acted as if they were real. German spies were watching me. Good. Let them watch. Maybe I can kill them in the real war. April 28th. Eisenhower called today. He told me I was doing an important mission. He spoke diplomatically. But I know the truth. They've shelved me. The slapping incident in Sicily still haunts me. May 2nd. Bradley is preparing for Normandy. I'm playing with a fake army here. This isn't fair. I'm a warrior, not a puppet. But Patton's anger wasn't just directed at his own situation. It was also mixed with defensive feelings. Because on one hand, he understood the importance of the operation. At the beginning of May, at a private meeting, Eisenhower explained the facts of Patton. George, this deception is working. German intelligence believes in Fusag. Large panzer reserves are being kept north of the Rhine. They're not sending them to Normandy because they think you're going to attack Calais. Patton listened. He felt pride internally, but he was still angry. So my presence is more valuable than real armies? Eisenhower nodded. In this situation, yes, your reputation is the key to the deception. Patton wore a bitter smile. In Sicily, you almost removed me from duty. Now you're using my reputation. Eisenhower didn't answer because Patton was right. June 6, 1944, D-Day morning. History was being written. Thousands of ships were approaching the Normandy coast. Paratroopers had been behind enemy lines since the night. The great invasion had begun. Patton woke up that morning at his headquarters in southeast England. He listened to the news on the radio. The operation had begun. Bradley was there. Montgomery was there. Thousands of American and British soldiers were fighting. And Patton was here, in a safe office, at the head of a fake army. Patton spoke very little that day. Staff officers understood his state of mind. No one made unnecessary conversation. Patton looked out the window. Normandy was to the south. The war was there. He was here. In the afternoon, news began to arrive. Progress was being made. Beaches were being captured. Casualties were heavy but acceptable. The operation was working. Patton wrote in his diary, "A historic day, but I'm just a spectator. My soldiers are fighting. I'm watching. This is the hardest day for me." But then an interesting report came. German panzer divisions weren't moving to Normandy. They were waiting north of the Rhine. They were still afraid of the Fusag threat. They still thought Patton would attack Calais. Eisenhower called Patton in the evening. "George, the deception is working. The Germans still believe in you. They can't send major reinforcements to Normandy. By standing there, you're saving the men fighting here." Patton left a long silence. Then he replied, "Ike, I understand your logic, but this still hurts." June and July 1944. The war in Normandy intensified. American and British units were expanding the beachhead, but progress was slow. German resistance was tough. They were taking every meter of ground with blood. Patton was still in southeast England. The Fusag operation continued because it was still working. German intelligence still believed. Hitler still kept large panzer reserves in the Calais region. Patton's role hadn't changed. He was still showing preparation activities. He was still pretending to deal with the fake army. German spies were still watching him. But Patton was going crazy internally. News from the Normandy battle was coming. Bradley was advancing. Montgomery was fighting. Patton was waiting. He wrote in his diary, June 15th, it's been a month. I'm still here. Bradley is fighting in Normandy. I'm playing a role in a fake game. When will I enter the real war? June 25th. According to Eisenhower's plan, I'll go to Normandy at the end of July. Until then, the Fusag game continues. Patience. Damn patience. July 5th. Today I saw a news item on the BBC. They're talking about Bradley's successes. My name isn't even mentioned. As if I don't exist. Maybe I really don't exist. Patton's close friends saw his state of mind. He was restless, nervous, impatient. But there was nothing he could do. Orders were clear. The Fusag operation would continue. Patton would wait. Late July 1944. Eisenhower finally made the decision. Patton would go to Normandy. Third Army would be activated. Real command would begin. On July 28th, Patton crossed to France. When he set foot on the Normandy beaches, he took a deep breath. Finally real war. Third Army's activation became official on August 1st. Patton was now the commander of a real army. Not fake real. The tanks were real. The soldiers were real. The enemy was real. And Patton stopped waiting. From August 1st onwards, Third Army advanced like a hurricane. It passed through the gap created by Operation Cobra. It turned to Brittany, then headed east. The speed was incredible. It was advancing 50 to 60 kilometers per day. German units were shocked. Patton was finally happy. The tone in his diary changed. August 5th. I'm finally in real war. Third Army is advancing rapidly. This is my natural environment. Not fake armies, real war. August 10th. We swept from Avranches to the Loire. The Germans are fleeing. We're pursuing. This is it. August 15th. We advanced 250 kilometers in 3 weeks. Even Bradley was surprised. Eisenhower congratulated me. But I'm just doing my job. Patton's speed was truly historic. No modern army had advanced this fast. German generals were astonished. Patton's tanks were everywhere. In front of them, beside them, behind them. But Patton didn't forget one thing. The Fusag deception. Because it was still working. The Germans were still expecting a second invasion at Calais. While Patton was fighting in Normandy, German panzer reserves were still waiting in the north. September 1944. Paris was liberated. Allied armies reached the Belgian border. The end of the war seemed visible. Patton sat in his headquarters one evening, thinking about the past months. The Fusag deception had officially ended. The Germans now knew the truth. There would be no invasion at Calais. But it was too late. Critical months had been lost. Allied units in Normandy had consolidated without facing most of the German reserves. Intelligence reports showed Operation Fortitude was a tremendous success. Throughout June, July, and August, significant German units had been kept in the Calais region. They had been sent to Normandy late. Some were never sent at all. Eisenhower wrote a private letter to Patton. George, your role in the Fusag operation was invaluable. You saved the lives of thousands of American soldiers. History won't forget this. Patton read the letter. He felt complex emotions. On one hand, he was proud. The operation was successful. His contribution was real. On the other hand, he felt pain. He had been sidelined at the beginning of the most important operation. He wrote in his diary, September 20th, Eisenhower's letter came. He's thanking me. Fusag was successful. Good. But I still can't forget those days. Standing next to fake tanks. Watching the real war from outside. This was the hardest period for me. Patton also noticed something else. The deception operation had confirmed something about his military genius. The Germans had believed in him so much that they had even treated an imaginary army as real. Patton's reputation was a more effective deterrent than weapons. Spring 1945. Germany was defeated. The war in Europe had ended. Patton sat in his headquarters in Bavaria, evaluating his war memories. The Fusag experience often came to mind, especially when young officers asked, "General, where were you on D-Day?" Patton answered each time with a bitter smile. "I was being used as bait to deceive the Germans." But Patton gradually began to better understand the value of that experience. One day, he told a close staff officer, "You know, Fusag was the strangest period of my career. I commanded an army that wasn't real. I won a war without fighting. At first I was angry about this. It felt like an insult. But now I understand. That deception saved thousands of lives. Maybe tens of thousands. If German panzers had poured into Normandy in June, there would have been a massacre on the beaches." The staff officer asked, "So, would you do it again?" Patton thought, "Would I do it? Yes. Would I like it? No. But a soldier does things he doesn't like to do. An order is an order." Patton also realized that the deception operation had taught him another lesson. War wasn't just physical. It was psychological. Winning the enemy's mind could be more important than defeating the enemy's army. Fusag had conquered the German High Command's mind. This lesson deepened Patton's understanding of war. He had always focused on speed, aggression, physical force. But Fusag showed that perception management was just as critical. Patton's First U.S. Army Group experience remained a unique story in military history. One of history's greatest military geniuses had been the center of history's greatest military deception. And this contradiction contained deep lessons. First, the conflict between ego and duty. Patton had a tremendous ego. He saw himself as the best general. And he was right. He was truly very talented. But the First U.S. Army Group mission required him to put his ego aside. It asked him to accept being a puppet. Patton did it. It was difficult, but he did it. Second, short-term pain and long-term gain. Patton suffered in May-July 1944. He watched D-Day from outside. But this short-term pain brought long-term strategic gain. Allied casualties in Normandy decreased. The Germans massed soldiers in the wrong places. Patton's patience saved thousands of lives. Third, the power of reputation. Patton's military reputation was so strong that it was used like a real weapon. The Germans were so afraid of Patton that they even treated his imaginary army as real. Reputation could be more effective than tanks and artillery. In the post-war years, when the First U.S. Army Group operation was declassified, military historians studied it with admiration. It was the greatest deception operation, and Patton's role was critical. But Patton's own assessment was more complex. In the fall of 1945, in an interview with a journalist, he said, "First U.S. Army Group was a strange experience for me. On the most important days of my life, I had the most insignificant role, but ultimately, perhaps I made the most important contribution." That's the paradox. Sometimes the greatest service is provided by being invisible. The journalist asked, "So do you regret it?" Patton thought, "Do I regret it? No. Was I angry? Yes. But a soldier's job isn't to be emotional. It's to do the duty. I did my duty. The result was successful. That's enough." When Patton died in a traffic accident in December 1945, the First U.S. Army Group story was still secret. The public didn't know. Only senior commanders knew. But they knew that one of Patton's greatest services was the days he was invisible. Years later, when Fusag files were opened, Patton's diaries were also published. And the world saw that strong, egotistical, proud general had sacrificed his ego for duty. He had quietly done the hardest mission. One note in his diaries particularly stood out, dated June 15, 1944. "Today the war continues in Normandy. I'm playing with a fake army here. But maybe this is my most important battle. Because in this battle, the enemy is afraid of my presence. I'm winning without fighting. Strange but effective." This note perfectly summarized Patton's First U.S. Army Group experience. The mission he initially saw as an insult, he finally understood as a strategic victory. Winning without fighting was the greatest victory. Today, the Fusag operation is studied as a case study in military academies. And the same question is always asked: how did an ego like Patton accept such a mission? The answer lies in Patton's character. Yes, he had a massive ego, but he also had a deep sense of duty. He understood what it meant to be a soldier. And the hardest missions were sometimes the most invisible ones. The First U.S. Army Group experience caused Patton pain. His diaries clearly show this. But it also made him grow. It taught him that war was not just physical, but psychological. It reminded him that duty came before ego. And it left a great lesson for history. Sometimes the greatest service is done quietly. Patton wasn't in Normandy on the morning of June 6, 1944. But his effect was there, because German panzers were waiting at Calais in fear of Patton. And this waiting saved the lives of thousands of Allied soldiers. History's verdict is clear. Patton was used as bait in First U.S. Army Group. But this bait changed the strategy. Patton was angry, but he did his duty. And ultimately, those months when he remained invisible became one of his brightest achievements. This story's lesson is universal. Leadership sometimes requires not being in the spotlight, but being in the right place. Ego must sometimes be sacrificed, and the greatest victories are sometimes won quietly. Patton learned this in First U.S. Army Group. It was a painful lesson, but it was an effective lesson. If this story affected you, please hit the like button. Every like helps us reach more people with forgotten stories. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Leave a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. America, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia. This community is spread all over the world, and every viewer here plays a role in ensuring history is not forgotten. Thank you for watching.